session also. Okay, so right. So in the last class, what we have discussed, what things we have discussed in the last class? We just discussed
System
about the,
databases,
yes,
user
okay.
databases.
Yeah, we just discussed about the databases. Okay, we just discussed about the system databases. Okay, so how many system databases will be there? How many system databases will be there? Okay,
Master database, model
okay,
database,
okay,
MSDB,
okay,
TempDB, and resource DB.
okay. Master model, MSDB, TempDB, and resource DB. Okay, fine. Right. So how many user databases we can create per instance? How many user databases we can create per instance?
32,762.
Okay, so we can create 32,762. Actually, SQL Server supports 32,767 databases, but in that 5 are system databases. So we can create 32,762 user databases, right? So when we start SQL Server, which system database will start first? What is the order of system databases? Can anyone tell me? When you start SQL Server, which system database will start first, or what is the order of system databases?
First master database,
Okay,
and then model,
okay,
and then MSDB, then TempDB, and resource DB.
okay. Jashwanti, can you tell me what are the system databases that will come online first? Venkat, can you tell me?
Master database, temp database,
Okay,
model database, and final MSDB.
okay. Master temp, model, and MSDB. Huh? Okay. Venkat, right. Sheikh, can you try?
Like master first and then model, TempDB, then MSDB.
Okay,
And resource we cannot find that one.
okay, fine. Right, Venkat. Okay, so you know, right? First we have to, like, first model database will comes to online, then only we can, the temp DB will be created. Whenever you restart the SQL server, whenever you restart the SQL server, whenever you start the SQL server, every time a new temp database is going to be created. So it is going to take the properties from the model database. If model comes first, then your TempDB comes next. So depends upon the model database availability, your TempDB is going to be created, right? So what is the order? First master database, then of course wife and husband, right? We have discussed master and resource are like wife and husband. So first master database will start, then resource database will start, then your model database will start, then based on the model database your tempdb is going to be started, then finally MSDB, then finally all user databases are going to be started. Fine, clear, Venkat? Right.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So what is the query to find out all the databases? What is the query to find out all the databases? I want to check the database size, I want to check the database owner, I want to check whether the database is online or offline or suspect mode, okay, or else emergency. Okay, I want to see all these things. What query I have to use to find out the details of the database, right? Okay, so I'll give you one question for all of you. How many ways we can find out when is your SQL server last rebooted? In how many ways we can find out when is your SQL server is started? Or else I'll give you the like a simple question, in how many ways we can find when is your SQL server has been started or restarted? Tell me at least one way how to find when is your SQL server has been started, or where to find when is your SQL server has been started. We have multiple ways to find out, okay, when is your SQL server has been started or restarted. So tell me just one way. In the last class we have discussed a logical point, so based on that today also I just discussed the same logical point. Based on that logical point you just tell me when or where you can find when your SQL server has been started or restarted.
I think tempdb creation time
Okay,
is one of the way.
okay, fine. Shake, can you try? Okay, fine. Right. Very good. Okay. So whenever you restart your SQL server, a new tempdb is going to be created, right? So if you see when tempdb is created, then you can easily understand when is your SQL server has been rebooted. Okay, that is one logical question you are going to get in the interviews and all. And of course, you can find using current error log. Current error log will tell you the date and time when is your SQL server has been restarted. And you can use some queries also. On DM is there, by using the DM also you can find when is your SQL server has been restarted. And of course, by using event viewer also, in the event viewer you can find some of the application logs. There also you can find when is your SQL server has been started. Okay. Right, let me log into this virtual machine first. Right, so we'll see today we are going to do some deep dive into the databases. Okay, so you know in SQL Server, databases will be there. In databases, what will be there? In databases, what will be there?
The
What?
tables.
Tables, directly tables will be there.
No pages and
Okay, so pages where will be there? Where pages will be there? In databases, directly pages will be there.
no 8 pages will call something. I forgot that. I've
Okay,
read somewhere.
okay. So what is the database? What is the database?
Collection of data is called data.
Collection of data is called database. Huh? Okay, fine, fine, fine. Right. So we have already discussed database is a collection of data files and log files. Okay. Now, of course, you can say database is a container where we are going to store the data and all. Right. Usually, what is the definition for the database? Database is a collection of data files and log files and all. So usually, if you see the architecture of the SQL server, I'll show you. Okay. If you see the architecture of the SQL server, usually in the SQL server, pages will be, sorry, in the SQL server databases will be there. In the databases, okay, file groups will be there. File groups and log files will be there. Let me open the diagram. Yes, okay. So this is your layout of the SQL server. Okay, in your SQL server, usually collection of instances. Okay, instance will be there. In the instances, databases will be there. If you go inside the databases, file groups and log files will be there. Log file doesn't belongs to any file group. In the last class we have discussed log file doesn't belongs to any file group. So database is a collection of file groups and your log files. In the file groups, okay, your data files will be there. In the file groups, your data files will be there, mdf file and ndf file. So Database is nothing but a collection of data files and log files. The logical definition for the database is it's a collection of data files and log files. Okay, so data files, where it will be there, your data files will be there in the file groups. You cannot, okay, create a file without having file group. First you have to create a file group, then only you can create the data file, right? So by default you will get this primary data file, sorry, primary file group. Whenever you created your SQL server, or sorry, whenever you just created your database, automatically a primary file group will be created. In that primary file group, MDF file will be created. So primary file group and MDF files are default file and file groups. What is your default files in a database? MDF file and log file. What is the default file group in the database? Your primary file group. So whenever you are creating a database, of course data file and log file has to be created, right? Data file can't created without file group. So automatically at the time of creation of database itself, a primary file group will be created by default. So in that primary file group, you will have your MDF files and all, right? So inside the MDF files, extents will be there. Inside the MDF files, extents will be there. Inside the extents, you will have pages. Okay, inside the extents, you will have pages. So logically, your table is storing on a page. Each table is storing on a page. Okay, page size is 8 KB. There is no, we cannot change the page size and all. We cannot make it as a 2 KB, 3 KB, or 1 MB, 2 MB. You cannot make it as a, you cannot change the page size. Page size is fixed, which is 8 KB. So collection of 8 continuous data pages is called an extent. Collection of 8 continuous data pages is called an extent. Then what is the size of an extent? What is the size of an extent?
64 KB.
64 KB. Why? Because each page size is 8 KB. Extent is nothing but a collection of 8 data pages. So 8 into 8 KB, which is 64 KB. So this is the layout of your data files and pages and all. So inside SQL Server instances, usually SQL Server is nothing but an instance. So in the instances, you will have databases. Inside your databases, you will have file groups and log files. Okay, inside your file groups you will have data files. Okay, inside your file groups you will have data files. File group is nothing but a collection of data files. There is no file group concept for the log files. Okay, so inside your file groups, usually the default file group is primary. Whenever you are creating a database, the primary file group will be created automatically, or by default it will come with the database. Inside your primary file group, MDF file will be created. Usually MDF file is the default file in the database, but if you want extra files, you can add NDF file. What is meant by MDF file? Master data file. MDF file means master data file. NDF file means new data file or next data file, anything you can call. NDF file means new data file or next data file. Inside your data files, extents will be there. Inside your extents, pages will be there. So whenever you're creating any table, logically, okay, the table is creating on each page. So you can ask, can I create the big table in a single 8 KB page? No, it is not possible. It depends upon the table size. It is going to occupy multiple pages. But a table can be shared by pages. You can create a table on multiple pages. Okay, so say for example an employee table is there. You cannot fit an employee table inside one page. Okay, it is a big table. In such case, that table is going to use multiple data pages. Okay, a table can use multiple pages. Remember, logical point, a table can use multiple data pages, but a page cannot be used for creating multiple tables. You cannot create multiple tables on a page. One page, one table only. If it is free also, it will not allow you to create one more table in the same page. If the table is big, it is going to use one more page. So a table can use multiple pages, but a page cannot be used for creating multiple tables. You cannot create multiple tables on a page. Got it? You cannot create multiple pages on a, sorry, you cannot create multiple tables on a single page. So page size is 8 KB, okay, and the extent size is, of course, extent is nothing but collection of 8 data pages, right? So extent size is, okay, 64 KB. So before that we'll go, okay, we'll go for file groups and all, and before that what we'll do, we'll check how many databases are there in my SQL server. Okay, what is the database size, who is the owner of the database, what is the database ID, what is the state of the database. We'll check all these things. Okay, there is one query for that, that is called sp underscore help db. Actually we have two queries. One is a stored procedure which is sp underscore help db, and we have one more select query, select star from sys dot databases. By using these two queries you can find out how many databases are there in your SQL server, what is the size of the each database, who is the owner of the database, what is the state of the database, and what is the compatibility level of each database, all the things. And of course your collation settings of the database and version of the database, everything you can check in the sp underscore help db, or else you can check in the select star from sys dot databases and all. So I'll show you that output once we just discuss those output and all, then we'll go into the, okay, file groups concept, then we'll go files, then we'll go for the pages and all, right? This is my default instance. Let me connect to this default instance. Okay, new query window. By using, by clicking on this new query window, you can write the queries and all, you can execute queries on the server. Okay, so what is the query for that? sp underscore help db. If you run this query, then you can find, okay, all the databases and all. Of course you can just expand these databases, you can find how many databases are there. Okay, but this is not a proper way. If you have 100 databases, the list will increase, right? So you are not going to drag and drop, right? So we have a query for that, that is sp underscore help db. And once you just run this query, you can see here, okay, this is your database name and all, and this is your database size, and this is the owner of the database. So here if I don't change the owner of the database, who will become the owner of the database? While creating the database, I don't change the owner of the database, then who will the owner of the database, who will be the owner of the database? While creating the database, if I don't change the owner of the database, who will be the owner of that particular database? Or by default, who is the owner of the database?
One which we have logged in.
Okay, one who creates the database, okay, he will be the owner of the database and all. If I just connected as an administrator, here you can see, okay, I just connected as an administrator, by using administrator connection I just connected to my SQL server. So if I create any database, usually what happened, he will be the owner of the database. You can see here how to create new database. Simply click on this database, right click on it, you can see new database option. Okay, there you can see owner. Okay, default means what? Who is creating the database, he will be the owner, that is the default. I don't want to be a owner. Okay, so you have to change it to sa. For all objects in the SQL server, sa is the default owner. Sa means sysadmin. Remember, for all objects, if it is a job, or else if it is a database, anything, the owner should be sa. Individual persons should not be act as the owners of any objects. Why? Because if that person is moved from the organization, if he leaves the organization, his account got removed from the active directory. So all the objects that are associated with that object, okay, all the objects that are associated with that account, usually they will not run properly, or those objects will be down usually, right? So here you can change the owner of the database and all, and you can see whether the database is, when it was created and all, you can see here. And of course this is very important, okay, database id. db id means database id. Okay, and when the database is created, you can see here. Okay, so if you see here the temp db, right, and you can drag the columns like this also, whatever column you want, you can simply drag it. Okay, and if you see temp db, here it is showing a November 7. 2020. And if you go to tempdb properties, there you can see, right click properties of the tempdb, there you can see when it was created. Okay, 11/7/2020 at 7:46 p.m. So by this time my SQL server has been started. Means today 11/7/2020 at 7:46 p.m. my SQL server has been started. Why? Because whenever SQL server has been started, a new temp DB will be created. So we can easily understand by checking the temp DB date and time when it was created and all. We can easily understand when your SQL server has been restarted. Okay, like this you can find. And of course you can see the database IDs of each database, and you can see, right, that what is the state of the database, whether it is online, offline, okay, suspect mode, okay, restoring mode, anything you can find in the status of that particular database. And whether you can find whether the database is read write, read only mode, you can find, okay, here in the read write or read only mode, the status also here in the updatability of that particular feature. Okay, so you can see the recovery model of the database also, full recovery model, simple recovery model and all. We have a class on it. Okay, don't worry, we have a class on recovery models and all. I'll tell you what is meant by recovery model. And of course you can find the compatibility level of database. Remember one thing, compatibility level means, right, if the SQL server belongs to SQL server 2012, if the version of the SQL server is SQL server 2012, then what is the compatibility level? What is the build number of SQL server 2012? What is the build number of SQL server 2012? What is the build number of SQL server 2016? Ati?
13. Okay. For 2016, it's 13.
Venkat, I can't hear you, Venkat.
For 13. For
13.
2016, it's 13.
Okay, okay, fine. Fine. Okay, so what is the compatibility level of SQL Server 2012?
11.
Okay,
Build
okay.
number is 11 for
Bill number is
2012.
11. Okay, and the folders are going to be created as
11 point dot.
folders. How the folders are going to be created? 110.
110.
So the same is compatibility level. So if any database that belongs to SQL Server 2012, okay, the compatibility level of the database is 110. If any database that belongs to SQL Server 2016, what is the compatibility level of those databases?
130.
130. That's it. You can see 130 in the SQL Server 2016. So why? What is the use of this compatibility level means, while restoring the database, if you restore a database from lower version to higher version, imagine you just restored a database from SQL Server 2012 to 2016. Okay, so even though you just restored a database from SQL Server 2012 to SQL Server 2016, that compatibility level of SQL Server 2012 does not changed by default. Okay, so here in the 2016, all databases compatibility levels will show as 130, 130, 130, and the one which you restored from the old version, which is SQL Server 2012, it will show the compatibility level as 110. That means you can easily identify whether the database has been created or else the database has been restored and all. And of course, you can change the compatibility levels also, right? So by using compatibility levels, you can identify that databases belongs to which version. Compatibility level is useful to identify the version of that particular database and all, right? So and we have one more important column called dbid. So here you can see dbid. What is the dbid of master database?
1.
One. Okay, so you can easily understand. Okay, the master database is the primary database. Master database is the very important database. Okay, so usually master database id is 1. And what is the dbid of, like, what is the second dbid? What is the database of dbid 2?
MPDB.
Temp db,
Resource DB.
resource db, resource db or temp db or model db?
TempDB.
MPDB.
Temp db. Okay, Fine. Right. So you are correct. Okay. You cannot find resource database ID. Aarti, you cannot find resource database anywhere in the SQL server. In the table results also you cannot find. So the DB ID of okay temp DB is 2. Okay, you can see temp DB ID is 2, and master database DB ID is 1, and model database DB ID is 3, and of course MSDB is 4. Okay, from 5 onwards user databases will start. Okay, from 5 onwards user databases will start. You cannot find the resource database id also, but there is a uh, myth kind of thing in the Google. If you ask what is the DB ID of resource database, okay, you will get an answer. The last database id, what is the last database id? 32,767. Okay, you cannot find the results anywhere, but in the Google somewhere someone posted maybe 32,767 is the resource database id and all. Okay, so the resource database id you cannot find in the management studio or else any of the results. Okay, that resource database id may be 32,767. That is just a myth. Okay, there is no proofs for that. Right, fine. So right, well, let me quickly go inside the database. Okay, in the database what will be there? File groups will be there, right? In the database usually what will be there? File groups and log files will be there. Just we'll discuss the log file architecture in a separate session. We'll discuss about the file groups. Okay, so whenever you create a database, by default primary file group will come. Whenever you create a database, where I can see, you can see here, if you just trying to create a database, okay, right click on a databases, and if you see here new database, if you select new database, and here if you go, okay, let me type the name as sales database. Okay, sales. Right, if you go here options, and you can see here these are the files of my database: sales mdf file, sales underscore log. And you can see here what is that file type, whether it is a data file or log file. You can see here, if you can see rows data, that is a data file. If you can see log, that is a log file. And you can see one more important column is file group here, and this rows data means this data file belongs to primary file group, and this log file doesn't belongs to any file group. Okay, so file group concept is not there in the log file. Log file architecture is completely different. Log file architecture is completely different. And if you go here file groups option, there you can see what is the default. I didn't created this primary file group, right? I didn't type it anywhere also. Whenever I just typed sales database, I just typed the name as sales. But how I can see primary will come by default. Whenever you're trying to create a new database, primary file group will be created automatically. In this primary file group you can see one file, which is mdf file. MDF file means what? Master data file. Okay, MDF file means for every database, master data file will be there. Don't think master data file means a master database data file. For every database, MDF file will be there. What and all will be stored in this MDF file? All the metadata of that particular database will be stored in the MDF file. All the metadata of that database will be stored in the MDF file. What is this metadata? What is the database name? Okay, how many tables are there? What are the data types? Okay, data about the data. This kind of information will be stored in the MDF file. So usually people will not store the tables and all, user tables and all in the MDF file. Why? Because if you have, just if you leave the MDF file, if you just dedicated this MDF file for the metadata, if you create data files for storing your user data and all, the performance of the database will be good. But usually it's just a recommended. Okay, Microsoft recommended this one. Microsoft has recommended this option, but usually what people will do, they will not listen that they are going to create user databases, user tables and all in this MDF file. Okay, so usually the best option is don't create any tables in the MDF file. Just leave that MDF file for the metadata and all. So if your MDF file is having enough space for the metadata, so your database performance will be good. And what and all tables you want to create, just add one more file. If you click on this add button here, you can see, okay, if you just click on add here, one more file will be added. Okay, sales underscore 2. Okay, so you can create either it is a log file or data file. You can select here, I am going to create a data file, right? So of course it should belongs to primary file group. If you don't want to create this primary, if you don't want to create this data file in the primary file group, you can create new file group and you can keep this file in that particular file group. Remember, a file should belongs to any of the file group. It can't exist like a log file, it can't exist alone like a log file. A data file should belongs to any of the file group. It should exist only on file group. Okay, it should exist only on file group. Okay, file group should be there if you want to create any data file and all. Either you can keep it in a primary file group, or else if you don't want to keep that file in a primary file group, simply keep it in a, okay, second, not secondary, just create one more file group and keep that data file into the particular file group and all. And you can keep the size as 300 or like that. We have already discussed all these points. And here you can just go to the file groups, and you can, if you want, you can add one more file group here. I want to add fg1 file group 1. Okay, I want to create fg1. And currently you see, right, currently, okay, mdf file and ndf file, okay, they are part of the primary file group. So that's why you can see files is 2 here. And you cannot, remember one thing, you cannot make the primary file group as read only. Why? Because in the primary file group metadata will be there. If you're trying to put the primary file group in the read only mode, the database will not comes to online. So that's why usually you cannot put primary file group in the read only mode. What is this default option? So you have a doubt now. I have two file groups. If I am trying to add, okay, I have two file groups. One file is there in the primary file group. Let me distribute the files. Okay, go to the general page. I am going to keep this file in the fg1. Okay, right now if you see here, there you can see one earlier two files are there in the primary file group. Now one file is there in the primary file group, one file is there in the fg1. Right now there is one file in the primary file group, there is one file in the fg1. So if I try to create any new table, in which file it is going to be created, either in the mdf file or newly added file. If I'm trying to add, or if I'm trying to create any new object, in which file it will be created, in the mdf file or in the ndf file. Sorry,
In MDF.
in mdf someone is saying some answer. What is that? Okay, the meeting is going to close now. Okay, let me close the meeting and let me reopen the meeting again. Just immediately join the meeting with the same link. Okay.